Contrary to the stereotypical pictures of overcrowded cities, 80% of India's 850 million people live in the vast countryside, as do most of its economic and social problems. The lifestyle here is one of subsistence. There is little leisure time for anyone, especially people in the lower rungs of India's age-old caste system. It's a social segregation that has virtually enslaved people in occupations involving any manual labor. And life is that much harder for women. Besides their full share of hard labor, women bear full responsibility for child-rearing and cooking at home. All this hard work doesn't even earn the typical rural family the assurance of food year-round. In many cases, laborers work their entire lives to pay off loans from the owners of land they work, loans that have typically been used for a marriage or a dowry. Predictably, the consequences of this impoverishment are disastrous for public health, and it was into such conditions that Dr. Mabel Arole arrived 24 years ago to set up practice with her husband Rajnikant. They settled in the remote western Indian town of Jamkhed.
Malnutrition among children was very high, 70% or so, and the children also suffered from many other diseases, infectious diseases, particularly measles, and they also had epidemics of whooping cough and of course diarrheal disease. The women were anemic, underweight, and they had problems during pregnancy, and so maternal mortality was high.
And our criteria were to go to the area which was very backward, very poor, and where there were no other facilities. And so we found Jamkhed was ideal for that.
Not the typical move for a pair of physicians whose alternative could have been a lucrative career in American medicine. But the Aroles were brimming with ideas to improve rural health, ideas they developed while at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
When we first came, they murmured among themselves, who are these doctors? Possibly they couldn't make it in the USA, that's why they have returned. They couldn't make it in Bombay, they couldn't make it in the big city. And so they have come to us.
So the first task for the Aroles was to establish credibility as doctors. They did this by offering the usual clinical curative services, which are now expanded to a full hospital. Then slowly they launched into the much larger game plan to tackle, or to help the village folk themselves tackle, the root causes of poor health.
Which is related to food production, agriculture, distribution, wages. Second thing is water supply. So really you have to make sure that it is a good water supply and people know how to use it. And so since we wanted to have a sustainable program, so we decided that the people should be involved from the beginning in our program. And therefore it was very necessary to identify politicians, leaders, and make them accept our program.
As you know, this is a male-dominated society, and when we went into the villages, we were mainly talking with the men's groups. But most of the problems, health problems, are related to women, to mothers, and it is mothers who take care of the children, and it is women who ultimately are in charge of nutrition. They are the ones who use water. And it became quite evident that unless the knowledge reached the mothers, the women in the villages, not much change would take place.
Thus was born the idea of village health workers. Women from surrounding villages were trained in nursing and midwifery. For a group with virtually no formal schooling, it was a common-sense curriculum in basic prenatal care, hygiene, and nutrition for mothers and children. It was also a way to track immunizations and general health. Knowledge health workers like Yamunabai took back to their villages. The results are readily evident in the faces of healthy children. In this village, people told us they used to bury about 12 infants and children each year. They haven't witnessed a child's death in 5 years. The Jamkhed area's infant mortality rate has been more than halved in the past 20 years. When the project began, about 5% of children were vaccinated against common diseases. That figure is closer to 80% today. Public health gains aside, what astonishes many here about the village health workers is who they are. From the outset, the Aroles sought people from lower castes, especially the so-called outcasts or untouchables, people who traditionally weren't even allowed to enter village walls. Today, that seems a distant memory in villages like Goregaon.
This rubble belongs to the village wall which separated the village from the Harijans, the untouchables. So now that the wall has been broken down, the village people decided to use the rubble to build a school. So they have used the stones for the foundation and the plinth.
How long ago was the wall broken down? Is this the last of it?
This is the last part. It started being broken down about, I would say, about 12 to 15 years ago.
The transformation did not come overnight, and Dr. Arole says it took some forced interaction. For example, during a severe drought in the 70s, feeding programs were held in the so-called untouchables area of villages, as were outpatient clinics. Wells were also dug here, forcing people of higher castes who needed water or health care to come to get it. Then inevitably there were incidents, like one in this village where an anemic high caste woman received blood from a Harijan or outcast man.
And of course the woman survived. Then our village health worker took that example and said, if the blood of a Harijan can be mixed with a high caste and actually give life to a high caste person, why are we practicing this discrimination?
There's other evidence of the long way villages like this one have come. Turns out its recently elected mayor, Mr. Sitaram Gawale, belongs to the so-called untouchables caste. A man of few words, Mr. Sitaram says he was nervous at first about being accepted. But with farmers' clubs and numerous other opportunities for social interaction, he says his caste is no longer an issue. Mr. Shahaji Patel, a man from the ruling landowner caste, also confessed to some early apprehension about the social changes. But he says in time he became coaxed. The changes were both socially desirable and in his economic interest. As for the village health workers, these men say they're just as important as doctors.
We actually like the village health workers better than doctors, because doctors treat you after you have fallen sick. But in giving knowledge to people about diseases that come from unclean water or the environment, in teaching people how to prevent disease, a person who is able to prevent disease is far better.
In the beginning, they did not have status in the village society. But once they established themselves, had their own organizations, they have achieved strength and they have influenced the men. For example, we had about 10 stills and bootlegging, and there was a lot of drinking. So the women said, "Why are we destroying our families?" So they made us get rid of all these stills.
Well, in the beginning, the husbands were suspicious. I think they were more suspicious about what this woman is doing. You know, it was more like is she getting in trouble with some men, that kind of a thing. But as the time went by, and these men realized that their knowledge is bringing more money than what they are used to, then they encouraged them. Also, the status of these women in the village gradually went up, because they saved so many children, they delivered so many women, they took care of illnesses.
In fact, financial stability has a huge impact on maternal and child health, so the Jamkhed program helps women launch businesses, selling bangles, a few chickens for an egg business, or a small store, for example, things that allow women to stay close to their children, especially nursing infants. It's that kind of help that allows Suman Darulkar to take time off from the fields to see to the health needs of her baby boy and 3 older daughters. Under a government land distribution program, she was able to obtain a plot of her own, on which she grows sunflowers. Her husband, with his family, meanwhile, opened a small store in Goregaon. Things are considerably better for my children, she says. They have good clothes, food, and many other things she herself barely had as a child. And even though her lifestyle to an outsider still seems incredibly arduous, women like Suman Darulkar are optimistic about the future, for perhaps the first time in history around here. Although she had more children than planned in order to have a son, Mrs. Darulkar has high hopes for her daughters, who have traditionally been viewed as financial liabilities in India.
My daughters need to be educated so they don't have the same problems that I did. I did not have any schooling at all. My oldest daughter is in the 5th grade, and I'm going to see that she goes much farther, even gets vocation.
How are you? Good morning.
Although boys still predominate, girls are sent to school in far greater numbers than before. Even more significant in the larger context is the total number of children in the village.
Because mothers are assured that the children born have a fair chance of living and reaching adulthood, women are prepared to curtail their families after they get one son. And so we are seeing there is a visible change in the number of children that we see in the villages, in the birth rate.
What is it now?
The birth rate is now 20 per thousand, as against 40 per thousand.
It's the kind of progress that years of government family planning programs haven't come close to matching. Yet the Arole's approach has been almost startling in its simplicity.
That's why they say you invent a simple mousetrap and the whole world will come to you. And this is what it is, it's just a simple mousetrap.
Indeed, dozens of similar projects have been launched elsewhere in India, and scholars, public health, and social workers have come here from no fewer than 95 countries to study the success of the Aroles.